Ever wondered about who the a-hole is in these crazy stories? Let's find out. Am I the a-hole for exposing my parents when they forgot about me on their wedding? Once, my parents were married a couple of weeks ago in Hawaii, and they invited my siblings and a few friends, but forgot to include me in any part of the planning, the ceremony, or the trip. So I exposed them on social media, and now they are furious. I know this seems like a weird situation, but I just feel so angry and depressed that I feel the need to vent, even if no one is listening. So, I, 17F, was recently forgotten about on the day of my parents' wedding. My parents have been together for about 25 years, but they never actually got married. That's why when my dad, 50M, proposed to my mother, 49F, on their anniversary, which they have always celebrated on the date my mother found out she was pregnant with my eldest sister. Even if they were already together before, everyone, including me, was elated and celebrated the occasion with great joy. This happened all the way back in February. They immediately jumped into wedding planning, deciding very early on a small event in Hawaii with just the closest family and friends for an intimate ceremony. Almost immediately, my mother asked my sister, 25F, to be her maid of honor, and my dad asked my brother, 22M, to be his groomsman. I wasn't surprised or offended by this. My sister had always been a mommy's girl, and they both enjoyed spending time with each other, shopping and socializing, so they had a very close bond. And the same goes for my father and brother. They always played football together and messed around with cars. My father even trained my brother's team for a while in middle school. That had always left me as the odd one out. I tried to insert myself on my family's hobbies and groups that they had within our home, but was always rebuffed. Maybe they could sense that my interest on their activities wasn't all that genuine, or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, I was used to being the last and least important member of my family. Mom had sis and Dad had bro. My parents had each other, and my two siblings were closer to each other than they ever were to me, leaving me very lonely and isolated in my own home. During the preparation for the wedding initially, it was suggested that I be the flower girl, but my sister thought that role would be more appropriate for her daughter, 3F, so that idea was quickly tossed away. Later on, my maternal grandmother suggested that I might read a poem or do a little bit of a speech during the ceremony, but both my parents refused because they wanted the wedding to be low-key, and they didn't think a cheesy and sappy speech would fit their vision, their literal words. I was still okay with all of this, even though it hurt to know I would be the only member of the family to not actually be part of the wedding party or have any role at all on the day. AITAH. As the day approached, my parents and siblings got more and more caught up on all the wedding planning. I noticed my mom didn't invite me dress shopping, and that whenever they would have discussions about the venue or the event, I was left out, so I decided to see if they would realize that I wasn't being involved at all, and kept quiet, waiting for them to ask me something, anything about the wedding, but that never happened. Forza. The wedding was set for 3 weeks ago, the end of August. The day before the departure, my mother casually asked if I had my luggage ready because we couldn't be late to the airport. I bluntly told her that I hadn't prepared anything. She got confused for a second and then snapped at me for not being prepared. I then asked her if I even had a ticket, and her face went pale. Yep, they hadn't even bought me a ticket, and I'm not even sure if I had a room or any accommodations once there, even though I was the only person in my family without a stable income. I work as a part-time babysitter. My parents had bought first-class tickets for my siblings and the couple other friends that were attending the wedding, but had forgotten me. My mom told me not to make a big deal out of it, and that they can just find me a low-cost ticket last minute from a cheap airline. But I just replied by asking her, then what? Do I even have a dress for the ceremony? She went with sis to buy hers and all the other female guests months ago, but I wasn't included. That's when my father came in and just told me to suck it up, and that I've never been a girly girl, so I could just wear whatever. I got mad at this because even though I'm not the most feminine girl in the planet, I would have loved to be included in such an important part of my parents' wedding, and it was about the fact that I was excluded for literally everything that had been going on for months. We all got into a fight with them, calling me entitled and accusing me of making myself small, intentionally, so they would forget me. Like that is a valid excuse for ignoring a child. They ended up telling me that if I was going to keep this attitude, I might as well skip the whole thing altogether, to which I responded with a defiant, "Fine," and went to my room. Next morning, they all left for Hawaii without me. So, the ceremony was really small, but they all posted loads of pictures on Insta and Facebook about how perfect and magical that whole week was being. People realized quickly that I wasn't in any of the photos and asked my parents why, to which they replied that unfortunately I had caught COVID before the trip and had to stay behind. My blood boiled at this. I don't know why this was the straw that broke the camel back for me, but it was. I decided to take a COVID test and published a picture of myself holding the negative test and captioned it, "Not sick at all, just forgotten." I tagged everyone that had questioned my absence from the trip and the wedding in the picture, and for good measure, also every person invited to it. I also wrote in the comments about how my parents had literally forgotten about anything to do with me until the day before parting, and how they actually uninvited me. Most people were on my side, and others couldn't believe it, and thought there must be something more to the story than what I was saying. But one thing is for certain, I completely ruined my parents' wedding, and their day was overshadowed by my confession. At first, I felt quite satisfied with myself for standing up on my own, but after a barrage of messages from my family calling me every name in the book, and later, when they came back, them furiously attacking me for my immature actions and my spoiled behavior, my pride deflated quickly, and I began to feel awful. I hate my family, and I hate being in this house, but I'm a minor and can't leave just yet. I do feel like I could have handled the situation better, though, and now I feel so depressed that I'm second-guessing everything I did, from not speaking up before to the way I exposed them. I also feel guilty for the lack of connection between all of my family and me, and maybe I could have done more. Am I the a-hole for wanting to divorce my husband for leaving me 8 months pregnant at a gas station and driving off? My husband and I have been married for 2 years. He has a habit of stopping the car and telling me to get out whenever we get into an argument, even if it was something so stupid and minor. He said he can't help his short temper, and having me get out the car would be him de-escalating the situation. So he thought it was an asterisk that asterisk bad. When I got pregnant, I told him that he should stop doing it, and he said okay. Honestly, I did not expect him to do it when I'm pregnant, and in my 8th month. So we were talking about what we would buy for the baby. We were particularly arguing about what color to choose for the baby's shoes. The other day, while we were on our way home from visiting his parents' ranch, which was a bit far from where we live, he disagreed with me at some point in the conversation, and it turned into an argument. He started lashing out verbally, then getting all dramatic argument till he was blue in the face. Suddenly, the car stopped at a gas station, and he told me to get out. I was stunned. I asked if he was being serious, and he told me he needed to cool off, and he couldn't do it with me being in the car. I tried to reason with him, but he insisted and refused to move. I got out and was feeling so awful and upset, I almost cried. The second I stepped out, he drove off. I tried to call him, but he turned his phone off. My blood was boiling, my feet were hurting, and I was hurt and in disbelief. I tried to call my brother, TTD, only one I know around the area, and it took him a whole 2 hours to come get me. I went home and found my husband sitting casually on the sofa watching TV. He seemed calm and relaxed. I lost it on him about what he did, and he defended himself, saying he couldn't help himself and that I should let it go. I told him I wanted divorce because I can't trust him after what he did. He looked so shocked, saying I was crazy to want to divorce him over an argument about baby shoes, and said he did what he did to give himself an asterisk me asterisk a chance to cool off from the fight. I went to stay with my brother, and here I am now. My husband hasn't stopped spam texting saying I'm being unreasonable, and that it's not like it's a new thing that he does this, since it's a habit of his, and I shouldn't judge him for how he deals with anger. I haven't spoken to him yet. I feel so frustrated, yet so hurt. Am I the a-hole for telling my husband I cheated on him even though I didn't? So I, 26F, have been married to my husband, 30M, for 6 years. About 2 years into our marriage, I found out my husband had cheated on me with a high school friend that he met at one of his friend's wedding. I didn't go with him because it was a few days after the delivery of my first baby. He claimed it was just a one-time mistake, that he had a few drinks too many, and that he regretted it. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. At that time, our daughter was only 1, and I didn't want to break up our family over something he swore was a mistake. I forgave him, or at least I thought I did. I convinced myself that it was something I could be okay with because I was afraid to start over. But honestly, I was too young and inexperienced to fully understand how deeply it had hurt me. 3 years into the marriage, we had our second child, our son, who's now 3. Around that time, I found out my husband didn't just cheat once. He had cheated asterisk multiple times. Asterisk with different women during the early years of our marriage. I found out when my MIL's birthday was coming up, and I wanted some pictures of her for a collage that I wanted to make for her. I was scrolling through my husband's photos when I found screenshots of women's profile from dating apps. So I went through his message from years ago to find out that he had been cheating on me even before the girl from the wedding. The texts were usually vague, but enough to confirm my suspicions. I confronted him, and at first he tried to deny it, but I had the proof. The message's dates exactly matched the periods he had reassured me that everything was good. He then gave up on the lie. When he finally confessed, he collapsed into sobs, gripping my hands, saying how much he hated himself for what he'd done, telling me how, in those days, he had been foolish, immature, and afraid of losing me. He begged me not to leave him. He promised that he had changed. He said it was not something he had done since we had our son, and that his family meant the world. Admittedly, his apology really got to me. I hesitated when I saw how broken he looked. I couldn't determine if it was sincere regret, desperation, or guilt. I told him, forgave him even though I never really did. The trust was broken, and the anger persisted despite my best efforts to move on. Since then, he has been acting like the perfect husband, as if to compensate for what he did. I'll admit it felt good to be the center of his attention after so long, but for the last 2 years I have been nothing but tolerating him, because when I look at him, all I see is lies. But now, getting to the title. Last weekend, after putting the kids to sleep, I decided to tell him that I had cheated on him. I didn't, but I wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain and betrayal I've been carrying all these years. When I told him, he was asterisk crushed asterisk. His face went pale, and he just kept saying, "No, you wouldn't. You couldn't." He begged me for details. When? Who? How could you do this to us? He couldn't believe that I had thrown away everything we'd been working to rebuild. He said he thought we were finally in a good place, and this destroyed him. I told him, "I expect you to forgive me, just like I forgave you." Now, he's completely heartbroken, barely speaking to me, acting like he's the victim here. He says asterisk what I did asterisk is worse, because we were finally getting better, and now I've torn us apart. Part of me feels guilty, as if I manipulated him, but another part of me thinks he needed to experience even a piece of what I went through. Am I the a-hole for not telling my husband's family that I speak their language? My husband Peter, 29M, and I, 27F, have been married for about 3 years. We have 1 child together, and I was pregnant with our second. I'm Western Canadian while he is from Germany. We lived in Canada for a long time, but because of inflation, moving back to Germany seemed like a better option for us. We bought a nice house in Hanover, where Peter is from. The day after our flights to Germany, we all visited Peter's family. This was the second time I have seen them. The first was at our wedding. They greeted us and brought us inside of the house, fussing over my son. We had dinner, and soon we left the house, wanting to settle into our new home. We visited Peter's family often for the next few months, but I had started to realize that they would sometimes speak about me in German. They would make rude comments on my hair and makeup, question my fashion choices, and overall were just very unkind to me. They also said mean things about my pregnant belly, which I was already insecure about. I ended up talking to my husband about this. I told him that I didn't like the way that they were treating me. I said that I hated how my every choice was judged. He told me that he would talk to his family. The next time that we went to his parents' house, there were no more mean comments. For about 3 months, it was like nothing ever happened. I gave birth to a perfect baby girl that we named Lilith. Peter's family was very upset when they heard the name. If you didn't know, Lilith means ghost, or of the night. We didn't pick this name because of its meaning, but because it is a name that every girl in my family has had for many years. My middle name is Lilith, along with my mom's, my grandma's, and even my great-grandma's. Satka. For a while, I didn't visit my in-laws. I didn't want to hear them talk about how I shouldn't have named my daughter Lilith. But yesterday we saw them again. It was my mother-in-law's birthday. As soon as we showed up, things started to go badly. Everybody wanted to hold Lilith, which made my mill upset because people weren't paying attention to her and made me overwhelmed. I didn't want people holding her. I was going through a pretty bad postpartum depression, and it was still pretty early to see people. I let people look at her, but declined when anyone asked to hold her. During dinner, I heard my Sil talking to my MIL in German. I heard her complaining about how she couldn't hold my baby. My Sil even had the audacity to call me, and I quote, a fat, ugly, hokey addict. I turned to my Sil and MIL and told them off in German. I basically said that I have always known what they have said about me, but calling me names was the last straw. I also mentioned how I have known German for almost my whole life. The table instantly blew up. People were yelling at me because apparently this was all my fault. I left with Peter and we haven't talked to them since. Am I the a-hole for leaving my party for beating cancer? I, 35, am a very private person. I have no social media, don't want my wife, 32F, posting photos of me. Although I don't tell her not to, just don't ask her to post me. Celebrating Father's Day or my birthday, I don't like attention on me and prefer to keep things low-key whenever I can. So, keeping that in mind, I was diagnosed with an extremely curable type of skin cancer. It was caught very early on, and I never felt scared for my life in any way, shape, or form. I'm an engineer, and I think analytically, and wasn't scared with a diagnosis with a 0.03% fatality rate. Still, I told my wife, of course, and she was terrified. We talked through it and told her my doctor was very optimistic and said we have caught it early on, etc. None of it seemed to help, but I tried. After a while, I told her that we shouldn't tell our kids, 5F and 7F. My wife wanted to tell them, but I was adamant about that. I'm not even sure they would understand what we're talking about. Reluctantly, she agreed not to. About a week later, I get a call from my dad, asking about my cancer. Turns out my wife posted on FB about my cancer that morning. I called her and wasn't happy that she posted my business and his behind the "you didn't say I couldn't post it, just not to tell the kids" excuse. There is no way she would think I wanted that posted online, no matter what I said. So she took it down and time went by. Very quickly, I was in remission with my skin cancer, and my doctor told me word for word, "We don't like to say you're cured, but you're cured." I told my wife and she was ecstatic. She told me she was worried all this time. I could tell, and glad we put this all behind us. I thought we could put this all behind us too. This weekend, I'm coming home on Friday. I see a lot of cars parked on the street, some in my driveway. I couldn't think of any birthdays or anniversaries I missed, but went in anyway. It was a party for my remission diagnosis. I was mortified at this. She's never done anything like this, and we've talked about how I would hate a surprise party multiple times. I asked what this is for, I said. I'm sorry, but I didn't know you planned this. I'm just coming back for some files and heading back to work. It was a lie. I gathered up some meaningless files in my office and said thanks to everyone for coming and left to go back to my office, messing around on my phone until everyone left. My wife knew I was lying and we fought that night, and I told her I don't know what's gotten into her, but she knows I would never want this, and she doesn't get to make a big deal out of something personal. I never wanted to be public in the first place. We've been cold this whole week, and my brother said I'm TA since I told him I just pretended to go to work. Am I the a-hole for kicking my sister's boyfriend out of my vacation home? My husband, Kai, and I own a vacation home on Lake Michigan. We both own it technically, but it was his before we got married. This becomes relevant later. My sister, Leah, has been using our vacation home since Kai and I started dating. We don't mind. She is always clean and courteous and leaves it better than she found it. However, she started dating her BF Al about a year ago, and I can't say the same for him. And Sue. Don't was to say Al is a total slob. He leaves dirty dishes, empty bottles, etc. everywhere and expects Leah to clean up. He has split custody of 2 young kids from his ex, who he just lets run free, expecting Leah to do the work even though they're his kids. On top of that, he's told Leah to get him a beer while she's busy, and he's watching TV a few times in front of Kai and me, so I can't imagine how he treats her when we're not around. Their house is always a mess because Leah works 60 hours a week and doesn't have the time to take care of 2 small kids and Al, clean, and work long hours. Yet somehow I think Leah really loves Al. She looks at him like he is the only man in the world. When she talks about him, her eyes light up and her voice is sweet and melodic. That's why when Leah asked if she and Al could use the vacation home this week, I said yes. I figured what's the worst that could happen. Plus, Kai and I already planned on going 3 days after them, so we'd overlap. You know, so what is that? When Kai and I got there, the vacation house was a pigsty. It smelled like rotting food. There was a mountain of dirty dishes in the sink, the floor was sticky, and there were drawings on the walls with crayons. We got to the living room, where lo and behold, Leah was scrambling to pick up toys, and Al was drinking a beer in a rocking chair. I immediately snatched the beer from his hand and asked him why he wasn't cleaning the mess he made. He asked why I assumed it was him and not Leah. I said it's because I'm not an idiot. He just chuckled and said Leah was doing the cleaning and there didn't need to be 2 people cleaning. His nonchalance really ticked me off, so I told him he and his sticky kids had an hour to pack up their things and leave before I called the cops. Al looked at Kai and Kai was like, "What are you looking at me for? Go pack." At this point, Leah was really upset with me. She said they were looking forward to unwinding, and I walked in and ruined it in 5 minutes, not even considering other resolutions to conflict. Plus, I had no claim to the house since I didn't buy it myself. I told her there is no conflict. Al is dead weight, and that's that. And as for the house, Kai owns it, and he was with me. She said if Al was leaving, she was leaving too. That night, I got a call from my mom asking why I kicked Leah out. I told her I kicked Al out, and Leah followed. My mom told me I need to be more accepting of new members of the family, and that not everyone has the same living style as me. Now she's mad, and Leah won't talk to me. Am I the a-hole for what I said when my parents announced they were having another baby? My parents have 7 kids. There's me, 16M, Kayla, 13F, Robin, 12M, Sam, 10M, Lacey, 8F, Zoe, 6F, and Robbie, 4M. They only ever intended to have 2 kids, and even with me and Kayla alone, they'd still struggle. My parents don't have great jobs. We never had much space in our house to begin with, and now we're all crammed in. I started working at 13 to get money so I could pay for stuff I needed, like a laptop, which I didn't have access to when my school first shut down. We didn't even have internet then. My parents swore they were done with Robbie and they'd get us back on track, and that I wouldn't need to work just to pay for stuff I needed for school. The weight of being the oldest is already a lot, and I have paid for stuff before. I babysit so my parents can work nights or get a break. I take care of the house most days so they can focus on earning money. But it's a lot, and we're really too big of a family for what we can actually afford. My parents get help from the government, but it doesn't go far because they're not good with money or with buying groceries. When no baby came right after Robbie, I thought they were serious, and I started to think about my future. I'd love to learn to cook better and work in a restaurant. Not college exactly, because we could never afford it, and my grades aren't good enough, but something. Then Monday, my parents sat us down and told us they're having another baby, and Mom is like 14 weeks pregnant. They knew for 7 weeks and didn't want to tell us until they were ready. My siblings were mostly surprised, but me? I said not again. I think I even cried a little, which caught me off guard because I'm not a crier, usually. This was apparently enough to break me, though. My parents got so angry at me and told me to check my attitude. I told them they gave me this attitude by being so reckless and putting so much on me, and now they've broken their promise, and we're going to struggle even more than before. They told me to stop acting like they're doing something to me, that accidents happen, and they'd never abort, even if they could. They told me to focus on making things okay, and less on being so negative. Well, I know people say that having money isn't as important as long as you have a loving family, and maybe that's true for some people. But mine feel like a weight I have to carry and not something I'm blessed with. They're a responsibility on me, a burden, really. And maybe that's awful to say, but it's how I really feel. I hate worrying about what'll happen if they can't afford the bills, or if my laptop breaks and I can't afford to fix it, or get a new one. Or what if we can't afford food? Or we can, but I have to pay for groceries instead of save. Am I the a-hole for divorcing my husband because he spent 10 minutes in the car during a family emergency? I, F, have been married to my husband, M, for 2 years. He has a habit of sitting in the car 5-10 minutes before entering the house. I don't know why he does it, but he talked about a past traumatic experience he had when he came home and caught his ex cheating on him. Because of that, he'd just spend a few minutes in his car before he enters his home as a response to his trauma. Now, I won't say that he's wrong in coping with what happened, but this has made me feel uneasy, and it had caused many fights between us. Like when we have guests, he'd sit outside before coming in, or when dinner is waiting on him, and he'd take 10 minutes silently sitting in the car. I was worried that something might come up, and he does not respond properly. And it happened last week. My 8-year-old son tripped and fell from the stairs and broke his ankle. He was in so much pain, and I called my husband to come take him to the hospital, and he rushed out of work. But then I called, and then I was stunned when I looked out the window, and I saw him sitting outside the house in his car. I was both shocked and angry. I ran outside, and I asked how long he was sitting in the car. He told me around 8 minutes. I asked why he didn't come into the house immediately to help, and he said he would after 2 more minutes. I was so mad and hurt, but tried to rush him, and he insisted he wouldn't feel comfortable coming in until the 10 minutes were up. He told me to get my son ready to take him to the hospital, but I started screaming at him nonstop, telling him this was a family emergency, and that he was out of his mind to behave like that. It might not have been my best response, but I was shocked by his behavior and quite concerned because I had this situation always stuck in the back of mind, thinking what my husband do when there's a family emergency. I ended up taking my son by myself when my neighbor intervened and offered to take us. We went to the hospital, and later my husband came and tried to talk to me, but I refused. I then went to stay with my mom and texted him that I wanted a divorce. He tried to rationalize and justify what he's done, saying he could not help it, and that he was nervous and wanted to help my son, but felt stuck. I refused to reply to his messages, and days later his family literally harassed me, saying I was making my husband's trauma more severe, and that I disrespected his boundaries by pushing him off his limits. I feel lost and unable to think because of the whole ordeal. My family are with me on this, but they can be biased sometimes. My husband is still trying to basically talk me out of divorce, saying I'm making a huge deal out of it. I feel like I no longer have trust in him, especially when it comes to serious stuff, like how cold he acted in a family emergency.